Okay, just now we ended up with this chart, right? Which is the default line chart given by Microsoft. And also it's the case study. And we know that the line chart is the best because we are tracking time over a period of time. And we want to see the gap that is increasing after May. So how can we do that? Let me walk you through. The first step is to establish a decluttering process, which is to remove unnecessary grid lines, borders, backgrounds, markers. Sometimes it will generate markers in your chart. And also special effect. Don't you realize sometimes it will generate a 3D effect or a shadow at your bar? So that are those things that is not necessary, right? Let me do a walkthrough. How can we do this step? Grid lines, borders. I'm sure some of you might know how to do because you are an Excel expert or a graph expert. But just let me walk through so that everybody understand the steps to do this thing. So firstly, grid lines. Grid lines basically is a not necessary thing to put. And I will tell you why. Because we are going to make things connected by showing numbers near to the point, the message that we want to show. So grid line is good for you, for the user to indicate where is this point to the axis. But later part, I will show you a trick that we don't need this grid line because it's very disturbing, especially if your grid line's color is very dark or very prominent in a dark color. So I need to delete grid line. You just click on the grid line, delete it, press delete, then delete it. Second is the border. We don't need a border. A graph is a graph. If you show it in a presentation, people still need to know that this is the graph. A border is not necessary. Sometimes even worse, a border and with the background color or the background images at the back. It is very distracting. We are showing the message or the numbers and the data, not to show the images or whatever background that you have. So delete it. Click the border, delete it. Okay, once I delete, now it's clear. If you have markers, delete the markers. If you have effects as in like shadows or whatsoever, delete it, right? That is how the simple effect of getting until the removing the unnecessary. I remove grid lines, I remove borders, I remove background, markers, and special effects. So these are the some decluttering process that I am walking you through now. Next, after I have done all those, right, this is suppose how it looks like. Great. I'm removing all those that is unnecessary. With this, I have a clean with some space and also neat. But there is still things for us to touch up. Next, we need to downplay those supporting elements. Well, what we want to achieve is presenting the data is by having our audience concentrate only at the area that we are talking. Hence, it is advisable to reduce the focus for the supporting elements by reducing the numbers, the colors, also the lighten the non-important things over here, and the font consistency. Okay, in this second step, we need to reduce the color and font consistency. Sometimes when it generates the chart for you, most of the time it follows default. Is Calibri. The font type is Calibri. And perhaps maybe you are using a standard template. I'm sure that your company have a standard template. It's already by default, they have a standard font type. But if not, when you see something that is not the font type that you have, it is better for you to change your font type. Okay, over here I click on the whole chart. I go to my home, change to font type. So my corporate font type is Century Gothic. So I look for Century Gothic, I change. Once I change, it will change all into Century Gothic. Okay, the color. So I want to reduce the color of all these things into tone down a bit. Or you can remain as black color if you wish, but for me, I prefer to reduce it into a more grayish type of color. and also lighten the labels. All these things, basically, I wish to reduce it to a lighter color, to gray perhaps, yeah. But for this, I just still remain it. I can click over here and then just change the color to gray, to a more lighter color gray. This one also the same, to a more lighter color gray. And also the title. We will touch on title later on. See? Then also some missing lines, right? Because I deleted the border, the axis line not showing. I just click on this, and over here I want to show axis line. It's showing that the line not showing over here, but never mind. I right click and go format axis, and you can see the axis go to this line, and I want to show line. Okay, wait, okay, axis show line. It's a solid line. I make it more to a grayish. Okay, now I have line. Same thing for this. Show line. Okay, but I have missed out those markers for my X and Y axis. I go back to here and then want to show markers, tick mark. Tick mark only on major. I want it to be outside. Same thing for this, tick mark. Tick mark, major, outside. So now I have this, something like this, similar, right? So I change the size, change the color, meaning that if the font size is too big, you change it to more relative font size, reduce the color, lighten the labels, and also make it your font consistent. So this is how we have achieved whatever that we done on the step 2. Step 3, bring things together. Okay, bring things together is to play a little trick on human psychology. Okay, in order for me to walk you through, let me consult some expert on human psychology for design charts to see how we can perform better for this chart. Let me call out these 3 persons. These 3 are Germans. They have introduced, they are Gestalt psychologists. They have introduced this law where they govern the way that how humans perceive the world around them, to see things, how humans see things, right? And they came about with this law called the Gestalt law of visual perception. Okay, Gestalt law. The Gestalt here means patterns. Patterns. Okay, we are going to look how some of these rules can help us create better charts. The first rule that I'm going to introduce you is the rules of proximity. Now look at these dots over here. Some of you might see columns, some of you might see rows. Let me know in the chat box. If you see columns, type C. If you see rows, type R. Do you see columns or rows? True, right? Most of you see column because right, when the dots are closer to each other, it forms a column basis. So the rule says when something put close together are being seen together. And the interesting part is that your brain will think instantly without much effort for you to decide whether it's a row or column. I'm sure by now, most of you will say this is a row because the dots now are more closer together to form a rows instead of a column. And the interesting part is that your brain will think instantly without much effort to decide. Hence, whenever we visualize a chart, right, we must tap into this instant processing of your human relate rather than making them putting effort to look around of your charts to find a message. Right, so now that is how it looks like. So come back to this chart that we are still working on. If you see this chart, we need to have many efforts to travel our eyes around, back and forth, from the line to the legend, right? If you see the legend, okay, I know, there's a tiny line of blue, it's a received. Let's go back to the chart and see, this line is received, this is processed, and this is processed. And you need to relate back, this point, is it where, what is the ticket numbers for this particular point, peak point, right? So all these things requires a lot of eyes movement for your audience, and they need to exercise a lot to move from here, top and left, top and bottom, left and right to get the message out. So we want our user or our audience to be more simple and instantly get the message out from your chart. That is where we use this method we call the proximity law, where in proximity law, we are designing something that is related to it, right? You bring things together by selectively labeling those messages that you want to tell. As you see over here, I selectively label all those numbers that I want to tell, so that they don't need to see the point and relate back to y-axis and the point and the y-axis. And also label your legend near to the line that you want to tell, instead of depending on the legend that created by Microsoft, right? But over here, it is the legend. We need to directly label, as I said, right? But the only thing is that it is not easy to do it in a chart, to make it like just next to the line. What we are doing here is that we insert a text box near to the line, to the word of this text box near to the line that we are representing. So don't crack your head, don't need to design, especially if you design just one off chart like this. You just put the text box next to it and delete the default legends that given by Microsoft, right? And also of course, show the axis and y and x-axis title, and what is the y related when you put near the title. And we know that this axis is about the number of tickets, and the axis over here is about the year. And how can we achieve that? Let me show you the process. Okay, we have ended up over here. So what we want to do, of course, to delete this one. You click on the legend and delete it. Then you have a bigger space. What I want to do is to put in the words. I can use text box. Okay, process and receive. Okay, and how to make use of the title out from this? I can click on this axis, go and add axis title, both axis title. Right, once you have both axis title, you rename it number of tickets, and I know that my x-axis is here. And I bring it closer to the start of the year. So if I put in the middle, people might think that okay, is what? So I relate it back to the here. For the cat, I also relate it to the top. Okay, and these two, I want to change to the color of a gray that just now we put in. It depends whether you want to change or not. It's up to you whether, but for me, I just dim the thing out a bit. So selectively, I want to show the label for the numbers. Okay, I can click to show the numbers for this one, plus data label. I can show data label above the line or below the line, so I put it above the line. And this data label, I want to show it below the line. Okay, selectively I want to show, so other than that I don't want, I just delete it. How to delete it? You just click one time at this number, click another second time to get to this number, and then delete it. Okay, so it's a to modify this is a process that you need to really get into the nice chart. There's no one click you get all, right? So you have to slowly and surely you will get the the chart that is nice for you to present something. Great. I have ended up with this. Move this process a bit higher and this one a bit higher to next to the line. You see that by instantly, by looking at this chart, you have achieved the proximity, meaning that I know the orange line is a process and the blue line is the receive. And I know the numbers for all the different points. I don't need to move my eyes from the point to the y-axis again. I don't need to move my eyes from the line to the legend. So that is how we show what is needed in the close proximity. The next thing, the next rules or laws that I want to consult the psychologists just now, those German psychologists, is about similarity. Now all the dots are having same distance and at each other, right? You can't differentiate whether it's a row or column if I never show it in a color, right? But now if I color it the same as being seen together, now it forms column. It's again just now. The rules that we want to achieve is to bring things together to show proximity. That's why we direct label it, those things on the line and also near the line. And now we want to relate again with similarity of colors. And similarity of colors will help us to make the chart better. So if you see here, this is what I have achieved. This is what I have achieved by getting the color of the label exactly as the color of the line. Receive and the process is the same color. And also I make some visual impact on dots on those markers that I make. Other than that, those are not the story that I'm telling, so I just leave it as empty as it is. But what I want to achieve the story at this particular far end after May or June, July. That is the way that I am doing. So that's why proximity and also the color over here. So I'm sure you know how to do this thing. I don't want to walk you through with this step. Great. Okay. So next is to achieve another level is to bring things together and structure it with the hierarchical flow. Okay, the information flow is the one that we are talking about, how we structure and hierarchical it. Okay, because as a human, we see things from top to bottom, left to right. And also we see things in an alignment mode, especially if you are presenting to somebody that is very OCD, which is very particular of the arrangement and the alignment, right? You have to get the number 4 step right. The number 4 step is to make it like you must have a head, you must have a body, and you must have a tail for a particular thing. You must be aligned, whether centralized or left aligned or right aligned or just aligned. Okay, so that is where we want to achieve. Before we look at the chart, let us take a look at this chart. I'm sure by now you know this chart is not really good because it's very cut-out. We see the lines that is crossing each other to the chart. We see the background color that is distracting, and we see some text box, which is the source box at the chart itself. And if you see this chart, right, the head is at the bottom and the body is heavier at the top. Don't you realize? It's somewhat that is not based on human psychology, sees things that the head must be at the top and the body and the tail, right? So that is the human psychology. Once you have this slide, you feel uneasy looking at it. And what if we touch it up based according to what we have done just now? Delete whatever line that is not necessary, dim those secondary elements like the lines, the labels, the axis, and also structure it now. We want to structure it. The structure here means we have arrangement and the alignment. We want to have title, subtitle, the field, the data field, and also the source line. These are the four main critical things in order for you to show a data in a chart. The title. Usually in a title, it just gives a title line. Ticket received versus ticket resolved, or ticket over time, period of time. So those are very title that perhaps maybe by default automatically generated by Excel file if you just pick the numbers from the data field. But what we want to achieve, basically, we should have two. One is the title, is the main message, and the subtitle you can put whatever the title generated by Excel, which is the title relates to the data point. But the title, main title we want is the message that you want to tell. And the source line is important. Sometimes people might query you, especially if you are presenting to somebody that is very compliance or structured type, right? For the dominance and the influencer, they all not really care about where you get this data. But if you are really presented to a compliance type of people, or maybe more on the structured type of people, they will query you where you get this data from. That is where the source line is very important in any chart. Right? You can see here. And also, there's a percentage here is a best practice how we arrange it accordingly. Usually the title we will use 12% of the overall. Subtitle is just a small 8%, and the big chunk is the field, the data, the graph, and then lastly the smaller line is the source line. Right? Of course, this is just an indicator. You don't need to use your ruler to measure it exactly like that. Yeah, as good as you see, it looks pleasing, it looks easy, and it looks nice and clean. That is good enough. Okay, so with this, come back to this chart. This chart is good enough for me to know, to understand. Now you're talking about here, but the message is not clear, and it is still not really look pleasing or easy to a human, because things are not still aligned properly, and then there's no message indication for me. Right? So how can we do this? Basically is to touch it up with the structure and hierarchical process, where you make the title, the generic title, as a subtitle now. Then you add a text box on top to show your main message, and then add a source line to show where you get this source from. Now you see how nice, how easy pleasing looking of this chart. And we would want to compare. This is how before our chart, and this is how after we have touched up the chart, and it looks more nicer, more clean, and direct to the message. Right, so the 4 steps that we have established, let's recap. The first is to declutter. Declutter here, we remove those unnecessary grid lines, borders, background, markers, and special effects. The second step is to color and size, to downplay what is supporting role, and then to reduce the color, lighten the labels, and make your font consistent. So sometimes when you make maybe some mix and match font over there, you might not realize, but if you are presenting to somebody that is picky, they might comment on your chart. Perhaps your title you use Calibri, then your line, your axis you use Arial. Sometimes you don't realize. That's why it is good to make it as a habit. When you change a chart, change the text and the font together so that you have a consistency over here. Third step is to bring things together. Here we touch on human psychology, how we see things. We show the label directly near to each other, and we make use of the color so that all the color is similar. And lastly, we structure it and hierarchical it, so more on the flow of information, top to bottom, left to right, with the 4 elements, the title, the subtitle, the data field, and lastly is the source. And we proportionate it, so make that the head and the body and the tail more look proportionate and aligned. So this is what we have established, the 4 key steps.